and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. If you missed yesterday's program, I wanted to highlight the fact that we are all new, brand new episode of Frankly Speaking, but it is pre-taped. For about a week, we have to pre-tape it as we wait for some equipment, and then we'll be back live next week. Of course, I'll keep you updated on that, but that doesn't mean you cannot comment on the broadcast. You see the number on the bottom of your screen. Please reach out, text, leave a voicemail. You can email me as well, frank@wydctv.com, frank@wydctv.com. We have a lot to get to today. Quite a bit of presidential news, quite a bit of international, a few New York things. First, speaking of international, this is starting to make the rounds in the news more frequently, and it's, I think, deeply concerning. China brings back masks and social distancing in chilling echo of lockdown over mystery outbreak 4 years on from COVID. This coming from The Sun out of the United Kingdom. China has brought back masks and social distancing in a chilling echo of lockdown past as they battle what is considered a mystery pneumonia outbreak. Alarming footage has emerged of mask-wearing crowds inside Chinese hospitals as fears of a new pandemic sweep across the globe. Now, I'm going to skip all the details here, but they have a line in here that says, quote, "But China continues to insist that flu and the usual winter bugs are to blame for the latest outbreak, rather than a new virus, and that they can cope with a spike in sickness." So China has eased your worried mind by their statements. They're insisting that there's nothing to see here. Speaking of echoes of lockdown past, I wasn't going to jump to this, but it just popped in my mind. Speaking of COVID and that wild time and all that's changed, did you see that there's a book coming out by RFK Jr.? And it's called The Wuhan Cover-Up and the Terrifying Bioweapons Arms Race. And I was going to wait to say this to the presidential point of our discussion because, as you know, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running for president. And there's a lot of back and forth. Is he going to take votes from Trump? Is he going to take votes from Biden? And, of course, when he was in the Democrat Party, running for Democrat, the president, what did he start at, 20%? But anyway, we learned that small bookstores are actually shunning, not stocking, his book. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a member of the most famous political family in the United States and, to know, a best-selling author. But it may be hard to find his newest book at the local bookstore. When it comes out next week, some booksellers have decided not to stock Kennedy's latest, again, I'll give you the name, The Wuhan Cover-Up and the Terrifying Bioweapons Arms Race, citing concerns about the author's past positions. Now, is that typical of what a bookstore, should they be making that decision? I'm not saying they purchase every book, but like this piece says, and it's from Wall Street Journal, it is one of the most famous political names in United States history, and he is a former best-selling author. So it's kind of a trend that we see, and I've got a piece later on that we'll hopefully get to about journalism in general in this almost censorship campaign, is that they take it on their shoulders to make sure no one reads Kennedy's book. Again, that seems almost the opposite of what you'd expect from small bookstores, or maybe what small bookstores are known for. As a matter of fact, Kennedy saying similar and showing his disappointment. Independent bookstores are the traditional bulwark against corporate propaganda. Let me try that again. Traditional bulwarks against corporate propaganda and government censorship. I'm never really good at that word, but you get the point. That's what I mean. I guess that's what you think of when you see these small bookstores. You think maybe that's where you go to get something that you wouldn't get it maybe one of the big box stores, maybe some older reading material or something more, I don't know, controversial, something like that. So to think that they are taking it upon themselves to essentially censor the book is kind of fascinating. But I think it goes back to what we've talked about when it comes to Kennedy. They're not sure how to handle him. They don't like his initial popularity. They've tried to spin it, and I think spin it, in my opinion, that he's going to take the votes from Trump. That's who it's really going to hurt. To scare people away, maybe. I'm not sure. But I didn't mean to necessarily start on that tangent. Just wanted to bring that to you. We've got to take our first short break. Again, thank you for joining us, and please stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and again, we are pre-taped but all new, and I thank you so much for joining us. We will be going live at some point next week, and I will keep you up to date on that. But again, I can't highlight enough. You can still reach out, contact me, and weigh in on what we are discussing throughout the morning. I'd really appreciate that. A quick New York State issue, just piggybacking off what we talked about yesterday, which is Governor Cuomo, former governor, now disgraced, Andrew Cuomo, is he contemplating running for mayor of New York City? Now, Eric Adams, who would be his opponent, says, no, he's not thinking that at all. I don't know if that's the best source to go to, but he's definitely signaled that he wants to run for something, that he wants to get back into the political world. Well, now, adding on top of that, Melissa DeRosa, remember that name? Cuomo's former top aide, she's considering her own political run. She's got a new book out. It's a tell-all. I wonder if it does. But what's left unsaid? My life at the center of power, politics, and crisis. So she's promoting that. And she was asked, are you ever thinking about getting involved? She said, I'm really, disappointed in government right now at every level. And I think about it a lot. I always thought at some point I may run for something. And the more and more I sort of separate myself from everything that happened, the more I think that could be a reality. I have more left to give. I think that public service is where we can do the most good. Now, a political source said DeRosa was included in a recent political poll that was in the field in the last few weeks. She was the most powerful unelected person in New York State at age 34. She'd be crazy not to consider running. And she, when reached out to her for a comment by the New York Post, she said, never say never. That'd be interesting. I wonder what she could run for. I mean, obviously, if she's that popular, I don't see her running for governor against Hochul. I don't see her running for Senate. So maybe, she starts at some other level. But interesting, New York, the people that we keep picking in New York. Will this person work for Cuomo? We saw some of the disasters of Cuomo, not just personal issues, but also the nursing home decision, things like that. And yet, as a state, we say, you know what, his number two, maybe just the person for the job. All right, we're going to talk about presidential news. There's a lot of people suggesting, by the way, there's not going to be a presidential debate next year between whoever the nominee is. Most likely, according to polls, this is not a prediction or anything, but according to polls, would be Trump versus Biden, of course. But I guess both parties, according to The Hill, both parties have issues with how they're being run. The quote-unquote journalists they have to moderate. I don't know why necessarily the Democrat Party would have an issue with that, but they are saying that they're becoming, and both groups are saying they're becoming more, they want to be the star of the show. And that's been quite a few years now. I didn't realize this, but in the 90s, journalist moderators would occupy roughly 5% of the speaking time in debates. In the most recent series, moderator Chris Wallace consumed more than 25% of the speaking time. Now, this piece at The Hill, goes through what they think could bring back the debates, and it is an important part of history. Bring back debates, change the moderators, maybe change the venues. I don't know. I don't see President Biden wanting a debate no matter what's being done. I think the DNC is just making excuses because, I mean, let's face it, Biden's last campaign was very much from the basement, to sound cliche. We've seen some changes, some gaffes. I'm not saying anything shocking or controversial. So will they want a debate when Trump is known to be aggressive in debates? Whether or not you like what he says, whether or not you like his style, he is very aggressive. So could that be an excuse? And I think there's an argument to be made that the Republicans shouldn't be doing most of the debates they're doing. Very often they go to unfriendly territory, and then they wonder why they're all being attacked or ask questions that are not what are front and center in people's mind. What was it, the most recent debate where there was one question at the very end about immigration policy? So maybe not a presidential debate next year. That tradition down the drain. Now, of course, a big topic is, and we'll talk about it when we come back, is the Koch brothers endorsing Nikki Haley. At first I said, well, this is obviously a good thing. A lot of money behind her because of this. But then I realized, boy, the media hate the Koch brothers. So will this actually get the media, who's been fawning over Nikki Haley, trying to convince us she's the only way we can win? Is that going to get them to turn on her a little bit? And we've seen glimpses of it in a couple pieces, saying, well, she did work for the Trump administration, and maybe this isn't going to do it. This isn't going to be enough. And I thought, ooh, it changed on her. So the money's good, of course, for your campaign. But having the media, who has been very supportive, people that never want to see a Republican win, have been very supportive of Nikki Haley. So will it get them to turn on her? And again, I want to preface all this. I do like Nikki Haley. But the red flags, I know I've said it a million times, the red flags when the people that never want Republicans to win an election tell us this is the only way Republicans can win an election. Just piques my interest. But we've got to take another short break. Thank you again for joining us. And as always, you can comment. Koch brothers endorsement of Nikki Haley, good thing or bad thing? Are you disappointed that there'll be no presidential debate next year? Or likely, maybe not. It's up in the air. Will that be heartbreaking to you? They are entertaining. I'll be the first to admit it. I look forward to presidential debates, so I will miss it. But that's the political nerd in me. Will you miss it? So reach out at the bottom, and then on tomorrow's broadcast, I will read those comments as best as I can. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So again, stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking, broadcasting from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We are pre-taped, but all new, and I thank you so much for joining us. I am your host, Frank Agam. We were talking about Nikki Haley being endorsed by the Koch brothers. That's a sort of a blessing and a curse. Of course, you want the money, but does it get the media to turn on Nikki Haley? I think that's the main question. Now, the commitment by the network, Americans for Prosperity Action is the name of it, bolsters Ms. Haley as the campaign enters the final 7 weeks. This, according to DNYUZ.com. Since the first Republican primary debate, Ms. Haley has steadily climbed in the polls and is closely competing with Mr. DeSantis. Yes, Mr. DeSantis seems to be heading down as Nikki Haley's going up. That's, of course, nothing new. We've talked about that a lot in the past. But the New York Post, who I think has been pretty supportive of Nikki Haley, said that this is very powerful. This is very important, that the endorsement does matter. So you've got that side of the coin. Still, its significant Koch strategists are betting heavily on Haley, despite being invested so much in an ideology irreconcilable with hers. Yes, that's what's interesting. That goes to show maybe their dislike of Trump. But the fact that, and this is going to come out more and more, that, wait a minute, she was in the Trump administration. She does have not necessarily rhino, quote-unquote, rhino beliefs. So then, I'll continue, because we're just showing you the coverage, okay? Stephen Collinson, CNN, and others in networks like that have been supportive of Haley, have been wanting to see her do well for whatever reason. Not fans of Republicans, but want to see her do well. Well, Stephen Collinson says that Nikki Haley needs more than Koch's cash to beat Trump. And he raises kind of an interesting point. Their bet is that the former South Carolina governor can succeed where busted 2016 $100 million frontrunner Jeb Bush, Democrat nominee Hillary Clinton, 2 impeachments, old school Republicans like Mitt Romney, millions splashed by the Club for Growth and the Lincoln Project and allied groups, a 2020 election defeat, and several special counsels have failed, meaning that all of that has been against Trump. Is Nikki Haley the one that will be able to break that trend? It's not a bad point, because you go back to Jeb Bush, and I'm going to remind you, because it's funny, those 2 names are together, Mitt Romney and Jeb Bush, because that's, and again, I like Nikki Haley, but that's why I keep mentioning it, that it's the only way we can win is Jeb Bush. Only person that could beat Hillary Clinton is Jeb Bush. The only way Republicans will win is with Mitt Romney, and we can go back to McCain, et cetera. But so then you start to see some people turning because of the Koch endorsement. And then I saw this, and I thought it was just going to be another example that I could give to you about endorsements or support for her or going against her because of this. According to Nicole Hemmer, Nikki Haley is ready for her close-up. And I do have to take a short break. But when I saw that, I'm say, okay, well, they'll kind of praise her. It'll go. It takes a weird turn. And it shows you what we will be dealing with the media in 2024 and already, but 2024, what journalists think of themselves. So that's when we come back. But I do have to take a short break because we're running a little late, because I've been on a couple tangents so far this morning. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you again for joining us here on Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Okay, so I mentioned before break, there's just been back and forth on Nikki Haley since the Koch brothers endorsement. And I read this just to bring it to you as another, kind of comment on her campaign, but it took a very, very interesting turn. It's from CNN, and it's Nicole Hemmer. And I'm not going to it's a 5-page piece. I'm not going to get to all of it, but I read this line. And it said, with that clarity in mind, journalists could make clear the stakes of a second Trump presidency that goes beyond the very real threats to democratic governance that it poses. There are real material consequences to a Trump presidency that would leave working class Americans in worse shape economically. There may be a strain of Republicans interested in thinking about economic populism, but when it comes to actual governing, the Haley wing remains in the driver's seat. Okay. Now you're going to say, well, first of all, there's a lot of bias there in that quote, but obviously read a little bit further into what that's saying. Journalists have a duty to essentially push their narrative, push their bias. So it's no longer journalists just report on the facts. It's you have to show. It's almost like a warning to other journalists. You have to show that Trump is a threat to democracy. You have to use the talking points of the Biden campaign. And it doesn't stop there. But the change has to happen, and soon. A democratic system can't survive without strong, independent, and this is even italicized in her piece, useful journalism. For a democratic system on the brink, it is even more vital. So again, I've talked about this in the past. The media loves putting more importance on the media and love patting themselves on the back. But what Nicole Hemmer at CNN is saying is journalists have a responsibility to be what she says useful, kind of code word for you have to pick the quote unquote right candidate and go against the wrong candidate. She's made it crystal clear. She's not hiding that. Now, I will say that she is an associate professor of history. I'm not sure what her, which is actually scary that a professor of history is saying we need the media to push an agenda, to push a bias. But this is not the first time we've seen this. It's very much like the call where they say we cannot give such and such a platform. And in this case, we talked about it quite frequently, but we cannot give Trump a platform. So that they won't, of course, show his rallies, or they won't. Look at all the backlash when CNN had the audacity to have a town hall with him. People in their own newsroom turning on CNN. It was right on the front page of their website, saying things like this was a disgrace. We should have never done it. And that was from their own employees. So they don't want, and that ties in line with what Nicole Hammer is saying. You have to be useful. Useful means you can't give a platform to someone we disagree with. So as if you did not think the media was biased enough, this is just calling for more bias and maybe a megaphone for the bias, that you have a responsibility, you have a duty, you have, essentially, it is your job to be as biased as possible and go against the wrong candidate. Not necessarily prop up the right candidate, though they will, but it's more about going against what she says is a quote-unquote threat to democracy. So keep this in mind as we move to 2024. I know we've already seen it in the past. We've already seen this bias, but now they're not only calling for it, they're saying that's the only way you can do your job is if you have a clear political agenda. Now, whatever you think about Haley, whether you think she's going to move up and get the nomination from Trump, Biden believes, well, at least you would assume, because he is attacking Trump, he is treating Trump as the de facto Republican nominee. That's according to Bloomberg, that President Biden directly targeted Republican frontrunner Donald Trump at a campaign event this week, treating him as the de facto nominee and warning of the consequences for voters if his political rival is returned to the White House. Now, what do you think he had to say about Trump? What do you think do you think he got all of his talking points in one sentence? No, but he didn't do bad. He got 2 out of 3. Quote, Donald Trump and extreme MAGA Republicans, number 1, are determined to destroy American democracy. Number 2, the choice facing us could not be more stark. So in that statement, he did miss, of course, talking about abortion, but he got 2 out of 3. That's not bad. But what this signals, and then he went on to say that he's a threat to Obamacare, et cetera. But anyway, and the only reason a fundamental right has been stripped away from the American people is Donald Trump. So he did bring it up. Quote, running for president, bragging he killed Roe v. Wade. Is former President Trump doing that? I don't believe so. But anyway, so he did eventually hit it, but he did put Obamacare in there before. So interesting. So Biden essentially saying that Trump is the de facto Republican nominee, and that's why you're starting to see people like Liz Cheney. Did you notice Liz Cheney? Wait till you see what she said in this line. I think it's very interesting. But she has a new book coming out. I don't want to say full of yourself because that sounds very biased of me, but the book is called Oath and Honor. Okay. In her new book, former Representative Liz Cheney paints a scathing portrait of the Republican Party, condemning her former colleagues and party leaders as, quote, enablers and collaborators who, after the 2020 election, were, and I quote, this is the line that I like, willing to violate their oath to the Constitution out of political expediency and loyalty to Donald Trump. It's interesting someone like Liz Cheney would use the term political expediency. That's what piqued my interest in that statement. But of course, this is very useful to the media, going back to the media that is saying they're going to be biased. This is very useful to them because now they can go on and say, see, a Republican saying this. Now, you would think Liz Cheney would see what her father went through with the media and not care what the media think or not want that pat on the back from the media. That is not the case, as we've seen. So she loves being featured on CNN. This piece is from CNN, but it's been everywhere because she called, he called him Orange Jesus or something like that. The things we do for Orange Jesus, someone had said. So that the media can bring her out, talk about how much they hate Trump, how much she hates Trump. It's win-win. So she, I'm sure, will do okay with her book. From, again, people that didn't want to see her father win, that didn't want to see her win, if I'm being honest. But they will use her quotes. They will run with that as a headliner. Exclusive. Liz Cheney's new book. So imagine it's like Mitt Romney when he, I believe he went to CNN too. Imagine giving the exclusive as a Republican to a CNN, thinking of how CNN treated her father and thinking of how they treated her when she wasn't going after the former president. But when we come back, we will talk about the biggest news story of the day and in depth. Yes, when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are pre-taped, but all new. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting from the Hesselson studio, of course. I meant to mention it actually at the beginning of the program. Tomorrow on the show, we'll be talking with Kristen Brewer from the Gaffer District. We're going to find out all about Sparkle Christmas coming up this weekend on Market Street, as you just saw from our roof camera. So I mentioned before break, we talk about the biggest issue of the day. And this is so reminiscent of really the beginning of the Trump presidency, but all 4 years. The headline. I hope you're sitting down. Melania Trump's outfit sparks outrage at Rosalynn Carter's funeral, as viewers ask, why did she even bother coming? That's the headline. Now, this is out of the Sun. Imagine, I'm trying to think. Be honest. Think about that. Would you see a headline like that about Dr. Jill's outfit? Would you see that headline about, or not about any outfit of a first lady? I don't have to go through all Michelle Obama, whoever, other than Melania, because I mentioned that at the very beginning of Trump's presidency. I remember one of the first scandals was they were going to a disaster area, and when she got on Air Force One, she was wearing heels. When she got on, not when she got off, she was wearing boots. She wore heels, and this is so inappropriate. She's about to go to a disaster. She can't work in a disaster area in heels. It was all over the headlines. And of course, she gets off Air Force One. She's in boots. But they go on to quote random people on Twitter, which is very weak journalism. Once again, proving that Trump show no respect to anyone. Melania Trump attends Miss Carter's funeral in a light gray outfit. Every other former first lady is in traditional, respectful black. Not Melania. Why did she even bother coming? Or how about this one? Basically suggesting they should not even be in the Oval Office because of this. Everyone wears black, especially at a funeral like Rosalynn Carter's. It's different and what special? What's other funerals? It's always the case, but not in. That's a weird line. But not Melania Trump. She wears gray. She stands out like the sore thumb that she is. God forbid she should ever set foot in the Oval Office again. I have a feeling that's probably not what put that Twitter user over the edge on their vote for Trump. I'm guessing that probably wasn't the deciding factor. It was gray. It wasn't like she wore neon pink. I mean, well, anyway, we're going to keep it, unlike what CNN's calling for, we're going to keep it unbiased here and just read you what the headlines are saying and maybe read a little bit between the lines and tell you and report to you things that maybe others won't. That's our goal here on Frankly Speaking. Continuing with the media, again, signaling that they're going to be biased. So no surprise here. On the Read Out program on MSNBC, Matthew Dowd said that Trump will be criminally convicted before the Republican convention. I'm going to skip through his whole lengthy quote, but he said he'll win Iowa, win New Hampshire, win South Carolina, and he'll basically all but be the nominee and basically be there. And then he's going to get convicted before he goes to the RNC convention in July. So he'll be the nominee, but he'll be a convicted nominee in the midst of this. And then we'll be headed to a general election with a nominee of a major political party convicted at least in one court, if not two different courts in that time. A convicted felon running for president under the Republican Party. We have never in my life have ever seen a calendar that will unfold in that manner. But also is going to be so weird while this is going on. Republican voters voting for him to be the nominee of the party as he's convicted. Nothing new or historic necessarily said there, but nevertheless, needed to be said on MSNBC's The Read Out. We have got a couple other presidential things. I've got kind of a couple quick hits. Man, we are moving along fast this morning. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on Big Fox. And welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. Thank you so much for joining us. We're broadcasting from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. As of right now, we're pre-taped, but all new. We're going to be all new until we go live again next week. Then we'll be extra new and live. One last thing on the presidential race. I just wanted to mention this to you. Black Lives Matter leader has thrown his support behind former President Trump in the 2024 race. Mark Fisher, who is the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter Rhode Island, was on Fox and Friends saying it's the duplicity of the Democrats, the hypocrisy. We're not stupid. The brothers are not stupid. We understand when someone's for us and when someone is not. And it's obvious that the Democrat Party is not for us. And that's why a lot of people believe, because someone's been saying very similar, that Cornel West could take quite a few votes from President Biden, because he has said these same essential talking points. Fisher argued Democrats don't value the black vote during his interview. We've been used and abused for so long by that party. They don't value our vote. Their policies are basically racist policies. I believe it's a racist party. Donald Trump is just the opposite. He's going to tell you how it is. He's going to give it to you straight. Trump has done more for the black community than I can think any president I can think of in my lifetime. So we're giving you all sides, every single thing that we can as we have time to. Hey, by the way, don't forget that tonight at 9 p.m. on Fox News, Governor Gavin Newsom, Governor Ron DeSantis face off in that epic debate, a battle between the two Disney governors. It is scheduled for 9 o'clock today, Thursday, on Fox News, moderated, which is interesting, by Sean Hannity. And many people look at this and point to this as one of the reasons why they think Newsom is running a shadow campaign for president, that if Biden decides last minute that he's not going to run for re-election for whatever reason, health or the polls or you name it, that Newsom will be ready to step in. He can hit the ground running because he has been campaigning. He says it's in the name of campaigning for Biden, but he has been campaigning, for about a year, probably, give or take. Yeah, probably about a year. So it's going to be an interesting night for both of them when you think about it. Gavin Newsom, on paper, really has nothing to win, right, if he's not running for president. I mean, it's just, I guess, the mental exercise of having a debate. DeSantis has a lot to win because his polling has been kind of stagnant for the presidential race. So I think it'll be interesting. We'll see which avenues they go. It sounds like, and this is coming from the media, so who knows, it sounds like Hannity wants it to be kind of a red state versus blue state debate, but these guys may have different ideas. It may be more personal. And you couldn't really blame DeSantis of running it like a presidential debate, assuming that Gavin Newsom, if not this go around, which it's getting calendar-wise nearly impossible, but this go around, maybe next time. Newsom definitely has his sights set on the White House. I don't think I'm saying anything shocking whatsoever. But to do this debate does raise some questions of, does he know something? Or is he just hoping? Is he just gambling that maybe Biden says, you know what, I better not do this. The polls are bad. I don't have it in me. I'm not going to be able to campaign effectively. And I can't think of another name that could say, I've been doing this, essentially. I've been running a campaign for president. So right out of the gate. So let's take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I am your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. As I mentioned, we're pre-taped, but we are brand new, and you can still reach out and comment, and I will read or do the best I can to read your comment on the next day's program. And here is an example of that. I received this, yesterday. Good morning. So relieved that you weren't canceled. Well, thank you. Yes, it was a tech issue. We are working on it. We'll be live next week. But thank you for everybody that reached out, asking questions and seeing what's going on or commenting on the Facebook post. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me. But I was thrilled that Sheriff Allard was victorious in the repeal of one resolution that would have been a huge slap in the face for certain. Allard, but also all who support law enforcement and justice. This was a disgusting move to try to enact and everyone should take notice. Thank you for that comment from our viewer. Yes, we discussed on the program yesterday the repeal of one resolution. There's another one going through the court system, the indemnification. I'm going to screw it up every time, but I'm going to keep going for it. That's the kind of dedication we have here on Frankly Speaking. The indemnification resolution is still working its way through the court, but the insurance issue has been corrected. And I'm glad that I could bring that report to you. We're going to keep you updated on all of it. And I promise, I've already reached out to him, that once we get back live, that I'm going to have the sheriff on to fill us in, and just fill us in general. We love having Sheriff Allard on the program to tell us what's happening in Steuben County. So thank you for that comment. We have to take a short break because as always, I'm running late towards the end of the program. I had to mention this because there's a couple of things we're going to talk about with Israel. But do you remember Cynthia Nixon? That name might sound familiar. She was one of the stars of Sex and the City. But if you're a political-minded person, you may recall that she ran for governor here in New York State. And it was not successful. Speaking of not successful, she launched a hunger strike. The New York Post calls it a Hollywood-style hunger strike, and you'll understand what that means in a moment. The hunger strike was for a Gaza ceasefire. It was a 5-day hunger strike. And you got to say kudos to Cynthia Nixon for, if this doesn't raise awareness to her issue, I don't know what would. Because kudos for her. Out of the 5-day hunger strike, she made it 2 days. The former New York gubernatorial candidate will take part in the 5-day hunger strike for 2 days before she returns to New York for work commitments, she said Monday. I like what this critic had to say because it's kind of emphasizes what we're actually seeing here. Cynthia Nixon's begins her hunger strike, to trigger Israel-Hamas peace. Wait, for only 2 days? Sounds more like celebrity virtue fasting to me. Yeah, it's pretty pathetic. Just don't sign up for the hunger strike. There's other people doing it. Just don't sign up for it. Don't try to get the virtue signaling credit and then say, but I can only do 2 out of 5 days. It's not a sign-up sheet. And you don't get to pick and choose how many days. It's, I will, I'll volunteer for this day and this day, but not these 3 other days. That's not how a hunger strike works. 2 days, not quite as impressive, but as I said, it will bring attention, I suppose, to her misguided cause. Chuck Schumer, by the way, which you won't hear me say that this often, but he does have an interesting op-ed in the New York Times, if you want to find that for yourself. What American Jews fear the most. And he said 53 days ago, citizens of Israel suffered a horrendous attack orchestrated and executed by Hamas. And then he goes on to talk about the college campuses, which is kind of interesting. The vandalization, or vandalized buildings, I should say, just the assaults. And he said, America has always been exceptional. This is how he finishes. But when it matters most, are we still a nation that can defy the course of human history, where the Jewish people have been ostracized, expelled, and massacred over and over again? I believe the answer can and must be a resounding yes. And I will do everything in my power as Senate Majority Leader, as a Jewish American, as a citizen of a free society, as a human being, to make it so. Let's take a short break, a little bit more on this, and then we'll wrap things up on this edition of Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. This is our last segment of the show, and it has been a quick moving show. We've covered so much. I wanted to mention a few last minute things. For instance, we talked about Chuck Schumer's op-ed. Marco Rubio had a great exchange with an activist. And you know how these activists, they get all confrontational in their face and they're trying to record you and trying to trip up Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio took a different tact with that. And I think to his benefit. Senator Rubio, says the activist, will you call for a ceasefire in Gaza? Rubio says, no, I will not. On the contrary. And then he asks, are you filming it? Please, if you're not, start filming. I want you guys to get this. I want them to destroy every element of Hamas they can get their hands on. These people are vicious animals who did horrifying crimes. And I hope you guys post that. Well, of course, not going into activist favor, saying, and what about the civilians who are being killed every day? Rubio says, I blame Hamas. Hamas should stop hiding behind civilians, putting civilians in the way. Hamas knew that this attack was going to lead to this. So Hamas should stop building their military installations underneath hospitals and underneath and the activist doesn't like where this is going, starting to think they're probably not going to post it. It's just so you don't care. This is how weak their argument becomes. This is how they have to go to the extreme, saying, so you don't care that 15,000 have died? And Rubio says, absolutely I do. You don't care. I can't believe it comes off as so pathetic when you're losing an argument where you go to these extremes. You don't care about the babies that are being killed every day? Senator Rubio? Rubio says, I care. Oops. I think it's horrifying. I think it's terrible. And I think, and I wish more people would say this, a lot of people are saying this, but I like the way he's so forceful with it. And I think, let me start from the beginning. I care. I think it's horrifying. I think it's terrible. And I think Hamas is 100% to blame. That's what I think. Hey, make sure you post that, please. Not exactly. And by the way, that 15,000 number that you don't care about the 15,000 that have died. That figure is of 15,000 dead. That number comes on Hamas sources. Now, we know very often the media runs, unfortunately, with Hamas's narrative. So once that misinformation is out there, it's hard to rein it back in. It does not distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. There's a whole bunch of moving pieces there. But going to the extreme, trying to, trip Rubio up and being really a master in this case at it, I said, yeah, just hey, do me a favor, post that. That's a good reaction. And I mentioned that running with Hamas's talking points. I don't have time to get to it. We're obviously almost out of time. But the New York Post editorial board has a piece. The Times, meaning the New York Times, keeps making excuses for anti-Semitic outrages. Yeah, the Times. That's why I was surprised that they published. Not surprised, I guess you have to. It's a Senate Majority Leader, but Chuck Schumer's piece. New York Times, very questionable in some of their coverage. I'll put it that way. Biden, and then also this is from Michael Goodwin at the New York Post, saying Biden must be reminded Hamas is a terrorist group. And I'm going to skip ahead here because boy, we were almost out of time. The idea is that behind closed doors, he backed down and suggested that Hamas has garnered sympathy. It suggests that Hamas has garnered sympathy, if not outright support from some Americans, when he backed down in a meeting with 5 Muslim Americans. That's troubling in its own right, but Biden's apology signals he's willing to pander to them privately while publicly supporting Israel. Yeah. Well, we've said in the past, we wonder because of polling, his bad numbers, some of the, for lack of better word, threats that he's received, not like actual physical threats, but threats, hey, you might not get our vote if you continue with this strong support for Israel. I know it worries him. So we've wondered if he will weaken on his stance. Also, Jonathan Turley has a piece. Hunter Biden is finally going to face hard questions from those who won't ask nicely. And the House Oversight Committee is scheduled for December 13th to answer questions about what is alleged to be the largest influence peddling operation in history. Out of time. Have a great day. See you tomorrow on Frankly Speaking at 7.